Uh, and we come this morning in Exodus 20, verse 8, to the fourth of those commandments. And God spoke all these words: "Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigners residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them. But he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day, and he made it holy." The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. You've probably seen that guy before. Maybe you've been that guy. Despite the fact that it looks like they're simply crazy people talking to themselves, loudly we might add. People with Bluetooth headphones, or those little plugs that look like worms coming out of your ear. They seem to conduct business and even personal conversations everywhere. Standing in the middle of airports, in the mall, in restrooms. Because for many this morning, work truly is a ubiquitous 24-hour, 7 days a week, 365 days a year endeavor. Tethered by cell phones and by laptops, some folks are always connected to the office, ready to deal with whatever issues may come along, no matter what time of the day or what day of the week. They're never off, never offline, never really by themselves. To compete in this fast-paced, ever-changing worldwide business climate, they have determined to be agile and responsive to all kinds of business demands. Never mind that it's 3 o'clock in the morning here because it's 3 in the afternoon in Hong Kong. Even McDonald's figured out 20 years ago that instead of opening more franchises, they could increase their profits just by keeping their existing franchises open longer. So they began to expand their hours. 90% of the 13,700 McDonald's in this country, beyond 6 a.m., 11 p.m., many of them open all night long. But you have to wonder a little if it takes a toll after a while. At least according to one study published in the Harvard Business Review, 44% of professionals who earn high salaries believe their job paces are too fast. 89% think their jobs are too demanding. 36% suffer extreme stress symptoms, and 21% have all the signs of clinical depression. Even when they get away, 1 in 5 American workers do job-related things during their vacations. And because work accumulates while you're away, 43% report feeling overwhelmed when they get back to the office. So much so that some say, I just won't go. It's too hard after you get back. We were away for a few days this week. We were up at Junaluska. That is a Methodist campground in the Carolinas. Some of our friends here have a beautiful home there, and it's up in the hills a little bit, and you overlook this lake, and it's just overflowing with Methodist people. It's almost too many Methodist people. But it was lovely because up in that place we could rest and relax a little bit for a few days. Pastor DeAndre was there. He was doing worship services during the week at the campground there. I didn't have to do anything. I just had to sit, and it was nice. And our friend said, "This is as nice as the Rockies, but you can breathe here," which is great. A lot of people don't even do that. Majority of American workers today do not take their full vacation. It's too much trouble. Pastor Rick Warren has said it, we are indeed a piled-on, stretched to the limit society. We're chronically rushed, chronically late, chronically exhausted, chronically challenged. So many of us feel like Job did when he said, I have no peace, I have no quiet, I have no rest, and trouble just keeps on coming. Laden with too much activity, too much change, too many choices, too much work, yet too much debt. Many of us this morning are overloaded. There is no margin for error in our lives. All of which is why these ancient words of the fourth and longest commandment here in Exodus 20 may sound a bit strange to many folks today, but they're still incredibly relevant, perhaps especially relevant in our fast-paced, non-stop society. For what did the one who long ago made us remind us that we should do when it comes to ordering our lives and setting our schedules and checking our calendars and syncing our smartphones? He said simply, remember, zakar. It means to call something to mind, to take thought of it. Zakar, remember the Sabbath to keep it holy. And this is not merely a mental exercise, mind you, a cognitive practice, any more than remembering your wedding anniversary or your mother's birthday means being simply able to recall when it is. As any forgetful husband can well testify, some concrete demonstration of remembrance is expected on those times. And in a like way, biblical remembrance requires action too. When earlier in the book of Exodus, we are told God remembered Israel in its slavery. It didn't mean that God simply noticed, oh, there are slaves down there. It meant he delivered them from that slavery. That's why remembering the Sabbath was a big deal indeed for those ancient Hebrews. Words similar to these appear not simply here in the 10 laws given to Moses throughout the book of Exodus, before that in Genesis 2, afterwards in Numbers and Deuteronomy and Isaiah. Numbers 15 even tells us of a man who was found gathering wood on the Sabbath day and was actually put to death for it. So good Jews not only knew this law, they enforced it. So much so that by the time of Jesus, no other aspect of Hebrew faith was so surrounded by conflict and controversy as this one was. If you remember in the story of Jesus, oftentimes he was criticized for doing what? Working on the Sabbath, healing on the Sabbath, releasing people from demons on the Sabbath. The Pharisees in particular were masters at figuring out what was work and what wasn't work. From the time that the ceremonial trumpet sounded on Friday night, at the exact moment when you could no longer distinguish by the unaided eye a black thread from a white thread. From the time Sabbath began, you weren't supposed to do any labor. You weren't even supposed to walk more than about half a mile outside of the city limits. To do so would be working. And even today, in some segments of Orthodox Judaism, you can't drive a car on the Sabbath, and public buses don't operate on the Sabbath. Even elevators are programmed the day before to stop at every floor and open the door so people can get in or get out and never have to push a button. Because pushing a button involves an electrical switch closing a circuit, which can create a spark, which is like starting a fire, which is work. 39 creative activities that are prohibited on the Sabbath. Planting, plowing, reaping, gathering, grinding, cooking, baking, shearing, laundering, weaving, tying, untying, writing, even erasing. The only good prohibition, perhaps, is that monetary tipping is not allowed for Orthodox Jews on the Sabbath. Lest we think this is simply a Jewish issue, we should remember that it was our ancestors, the Puritans, who also fixated on the fourth commandment. Few other religious traditions created a greater list of shout-nots for Sabbath observance as the American Puritans did. Like the Pharisees, they banned traveling, cooking, agricultural work, whistling, even kissing on Sundays. They squelch so much that H.L. Mencken wants to define Puritanism as the haunting feeling that someone somewhere may be happy. And the result of that kind of thinking for Puritans was to produce in them the same kind of spirit as it did for the Pharisees. Summed up in an austere and unbending faith that was unattractive, out of reach for most people. And though it pains me to admit it, I have a feeling that a lot of folks still suffer from that same unappealing understanding about the Sabbath as well. For some people, it's about going to church, which is work for some people. For some people, it's about not being able to do lots of things, which is painful for them. During Hurricane Harvey, we had about 120 people who were here at the church spending a couple of days with us because they couldn't get out. And most of them slept in the sanctuary here. They were a little nervous, and I assured them they were not the first people to ever sleep in these pews. Because understand, sometimes you need rest, right? Let me suggest to you two simple ideas about the Sabbath. First, that it was not meant to be a guilt trip, but a gift to you and me. Not a guilt trip, a gift. Jesus once said, the Sabbath was made for man. Man wasn't made for the Sabbath. Keeping the Sabbath is about setting aside time for rest and genuine renewal in our lives. Not just spiritual, but physical and mental and emotional. Because whether we recognize it or not, we all need the rest. The idea of Sabbath rest is one that was built into the very framework of creation itself. God rested, so ought you and I. And every time in human history when people have tried to dismantle the Sabbath or ignore it for far too long, the results have been disastrous. In 1929, for instance, the Soviet government of Joseph Stalin decided that Sundays were an impediment to society because they meant that all industrial machines stayed silent and productivity fell to zero, and people retreated to such counter-revolutionary comforts as family life and religious practice. And so beginning on the first Sunday of October in 1929, 80% of the workforce were told to go to work, while 20% stayed home. And the colossal experiment of the Neprevikya, continuous working week, began. They abolished the 7-day calendar and has put in instead a 5-day cycle followed by a rest day. With each day color-coded, yellow, peach, red, purple, green, marked by a politically appropriate symbol, a wheat shaft, a red star, a hammer and sickle, a book, a woolen military cap. The population was divided up into 5 groups, and calendars showed days marked out in colored circles to indicate when you worked and when you rested. It was shift work on the grandest scale in human history. But the continuous work week was not simply an economic innovation. It was also an attempt to make religious observance nearly impossible without a Friday or a Saturday or a Sunday. Muslims, Jews, and Orthodox Christians were not able to attend corporate worship. Families didn't even have the same days off. That experiment failed on virtually every count, as the staggered rest days defeated the purpose of time off. And so after 11 years of near anarchy, when productivity actually fell because the constant use proved damaging for the machines, to say nothing of the workers. And shared responsibilities often meant no one took ownership of their work tasks. The 7-day cycle was reinstated in the Soviet Union in 1940. Soviets discovered that there are some things built into the very fabric of creation that we cannot change. And given what we said earlier about the 24-hour, 7-day cycle that we now live in, I wonder if we're not in for a similar kind of cultural breakdown one day. I understand that even just relaxing doesn't come automatically to some people, especially to us type A personalities who think we have to be doing something every moment of the day to justify our continued existence on this planet. But we can begin to rest perhaps by loosening up the tight wires of our lives, by learning not to take ourselves so seriously, nor our jobs. The ancient Greeks used to say, you will break the bow if you keep it always bent. Some folks will not appreciate these words, but I'm certain, like Chuck Swindoll, that a relaxed, easygoing Christian is miles more attractive than a rigid, uptight brother who squeaks when he walks and whines when he talks. The Sabbath was meant to be a gift to us. A gift. And so keeping the Sabbath is about setting aside time for rest and renewal. That's what the word Shabbat means. It means to desist, to cease from exertion. But secondly, keeping the Sabbath is about setting aside time for God. For in the Sabbath, I believe that rather than you and I saying, okay, God, we're here, let's get this over with. It is God who is saying to us in the Sabbath, I'm here. I'm available for you. That's why this word here in Exodus 28 falls smack dab in the middle of the Ten Commandments, between the ones that talk about our relationship to God and those that talk about our relationship to other people. This commandment is not about what God forbids at all. It's about what God is offering, which is an invitation, a privilege and a blessing to worship him in holiness and truth. It's what forms the basis for the great commandment Jesus later on mentioned, the summons to love the Lord with all of our hearts and minds and soul and strength. This is about setting aside time for a real relationship with the one who made us. You may remember an old hymn, take time to be holy, speak off with your Lord. The actual phrasing in the Hebrew text here would better read, remember the Sabbath in order to keep it holy, in order to set it apart for holiness. The words of Isaiah 58 speak powerfully to me at this point. Listen to verses 13 and 14 of that chapter, words which the prophet said came from the mouth of the Lord himself. If you keep your feet from breaking the Sabbath and from doing as you please on my holy day, if you call the Sabbath a delight and the Lord's day honorable, if you honor it by not going your own way and not doing as you please or speaking idle words, then you will find your joy in the Lord. And I will cause you to ride on the heights of the land and to feast on the inheritance of your fathers. But you hear the incredibly beautiful promise in these words. If you call the Sabbath a delight and the Lord's day honorable, then you will find your joy in the Lord. The true holiness of the Sabbath is not in what you and I may or may not do on this day. It's what God has already done with it, blessing it with his own presence for any who desire to worship him. Now, I could tell you that a lot of what people do on Sundays is not appropriate, but it's probably not appropriate on Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, or Saturdays either. at the very least, what we might consider doing on Sundays, if only for a few hours, is to turn off our cell phones and have a digital fast, to determine not to do work, but to rest. I don't know about you, but I grew up having a Sunday afternoon nap. It was de rigueur in our household, and I hated that as a kid. I thought, I don't want to take a nap. I wish to goodness somebody would make me take a nap now. Wouldn't that be great? We find ourselves, I think, needing that sense of, I've just got to check out so I can plug back in. That's what it's about. Whatever the particulars, we could follow inspiring examples of people like Eric Liddell. Refused to run the Olympic race he had trained for in the 1924 Paris Games because the heat fell on a Sunday. Wilbur Wright, he wouldn't fly his new airplane for the King of Spain because that monarch wanted to see it demonstrated on a Sunday. Zachary Taylor, who refused to be sworn in as president of the United States on the day appointed by the Constitution because it fell on a Sunday. Can you imagine a politician today? And William Gladstone was right when the Prime Minister of England, he once commented, "Tell me what the young people of England are doing on a Sunday, and I will tell you what the future of England will be." See, in the end, the real hallowedness of Sunday is simply the opportunity to renew and deepen our relationship with God, who has set aside his time in order to meet with us in love. So are you stressed out and stretched out? Or have you found your joy in the Lord? If not, maybe here's a good place to start looking for it. Not out of duty, out of desire, not out of law, out of love, not out of guilt, but as the acceptance of a gift. Ask yourself this question. Is there anything recognizably special about your Sundays? Is there anything that sets them apart from the other 6 days of the week? Is there anything that marks them and you as holy before the Lord? Hear the word of the Lord once more. Remember the Sabbath day in order to keep it holy. See, we do need the rest. Even more, we need the relationship. Blessed are those who find their joy in the Lord. They will ride to the heights of the land, feast on an inheritance indeed. Amen.